is all the beginning. This will be the intro.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Young Eager Writers podcast. I'm Desiree Brown. I'm here with Adrianna Brown, who she is the artistic director for the Adrianna Eve Company. She also last year did the philosophical themed showcase 20. She is a graduate student, her second year now, at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and she is my sister. So, Anna, if you want to just introduce yourself and talk about maybe like how you got into choreography and philosophy.
Yeah, I got into philosophy by accident. I think everybody does. I was originally an early education major and then took a deductive logic course and an intro to ethics course and kind of fell in love. It was just kind of something that I couldn't not do. Choreography came also around the same time. I danced for years, and I kind of decided that I didn't want to be a dancer necessarily, but I knew that I wanted to create dances. So I think that kind of also came naturally. My last showcase was purely experimental. It was me. I had 12 dancers, and we really didn't know what was going to come of it. And it ended up being really, really wonderful. And as of this year, we have doubled the size of the dancers and tripled the size of our staff. So, yeah, that's that.
Mm-hmm. And if you just want to talk a little bit about your ambitions. So, I mean, obviously I know this, but Anna, you're graduating this May.
Yeah.
You'll only be 20.
Yes.
Yeah, with a master's degree in philosophy.
Yeah.
So, like, you're like, yeah, of course.
I mean, people say that a lot. Like, if younger students graduate young, early, or whatever it is. The truth is I just had a lot of opportunities, and I took every one of them, you know. I took early college entry, and then I skipped my freshman year of high school, and then I did the early master's entry. So my senior year as an undergrad overlapped with my first year as an MA student. So everything just kind of happened quickly. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's harder to make friends, definitely, but yeah, I think if you have the opportunity to speed ahead, and that's something that works with what you're doing in that moment in time, I definitely think it's just really great.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things too that I've been talking to a lot of young writers who have published really early, but I know that a lot of people, I guess they don't frown upon it, but they're kind of like, well, just focus on your writing, like don't publish too quickly. But what's your advice to getting things done? You know, like looking ahead and just completing projects.
So obviously I'm not necessarily like a published author, and that's, but in philosophy we do need to publish books. That's the goal, to create philosophy books. But I also think that the quicker you get kind of into the habit of creating something and finishing a project, whether that be a chapter of a book or a paper, a philosophical paper, whatever it may be, the more you have to reflect on and grow. So, like, if you kind of wait for that moment to create, like if you're waiting for something to happen, if you're waiting for the perfect, book idea, or the perfect this or the perfect that, you're kind of missing the time now to actually do some really important work that you can reflect on, because nobody is ever perfect. Nobody will ever reach. Nobody will ever be perfect, but it's still the you still ought to try. And even in my classes, they have our midterms and our finals are book reviews, because as a philosophy student, they want to hear. The goal is to get published in a philosophy journal. Mm-hmm. So basically, what you do is you'll pick a book that's been published within the past 3 years or so, and then you write a book review on it, and then you submit it to journals. And they have us practice this in class, so that way we can just use that material in class and then apply it to journals. And that kind of process. So it's not necessarily like writing a book, or when you write a philosophical book, but it's also working on your writing skills, working on growing, and the earlier you can do that, the more practice you can have, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so you obviously deal with a lot of philosophical writing, academic writing.
Yeah.
Have you dabbled in any creative writing before?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody, has that thing where they're like, I could totally be a writer. Like, people who don't write, I mean. And so, yeah, I do have experience in creative writing, and just personally, like, just stories of my own. But in philosophy, my experience with creative writing definitely seep into my philosophical analytic work, I guess you could say. And it really shows. Like, my professors really like that about my writing. So, for example, philosophy is about arguing. And in order to argue something well, in order to get you to believe my thesis, in order to get you on my side, I need a kind of, we call it in philosophy the who cares method, basically, which is, why does this matter to you, right? So I have to pinpoint my most critical reader and say, hey, this is why you should care about that. And my creative writing does a lot of that work of, I start my my essays very different than other philosophers, in that I appeal to the kind of poetry of philosophy, so to speak. So I kind of want to immediately draw someone in, and like kind of thought experiments, or imagination. Like, we do this thing called like imagine this, and then we plan out a scenario so that we get the reader into our argument, and then we say, now that I have you ought to believe what I believe, kind of thing. So yeah, it definitely plays a part in me as an individual. Other philosophers are not like that at all, except we do. So there are philosophers who don't necessarily work like in the realm of poetry, but there are poets and creative writers in history that we study through philosophy. Emerson is one of them, and I can't remember. We just talked about him yesterday.
I know you're talking about Frederick Douglass too.
Yes, Frederick Douglass. We study in philosophy, and Audre Lorde, Lucy Irigaray. She's a poet, and it's a philosopher, poet, psychoanalytic, but it really, really great stuff that is, I think, really relevant to both creative writing and philosophy.
Yeah, I like that, just a merge of the two.
Yeah.
The biggest reason I really wanted you to talk on this podcast is about your choreography. And I think what's really unique is you're a storyteller, with your pieces. I really recognize that watching the 20 showcase, watching these stories come to life, and being behind the scenes, and you communicating to these dancers. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working with high schoolers in these projects, and they have been trained to just dance aimlessly, kind of just like very just, this part is sad, this part is happy, and it doesn't really matter what's going on behind the scenes. But I like to really get them involved in like the nitty-gritty work that I do. For example, there will be a lot of specific moments and specific movements in the choreography that are crucial to the audience understanding the story. So in the same way that I'm sure writers are, saying, I don't really know how to frame this sentence, but I know it needs this word in, or I know it needs this idea, or whatever it may be. That's the same thing with choreography. It's here is, the overarching message, and I know that I need to articulate this point right here to kind of catch them and keep them there. My audience, that is. So yeah, it I really, really like getting my dancers involved in that process, and really like letting them know about kind of, this is what we're trying to do. Make sure that this story, I guess it's like co-writing, and you both need to be on the same page. Everybody needs to be on the same page of what you're trying to convey, what you're trying to do, so I hope I answered that.
Yeah, no, and I think you brought a good point of co-writing. I was actually going to ask, I kind of view your dancers as characters in a way, but obviously as writers we can manipulate our characters to whatever we want. So, how do you best communicate to these people that are completely different minds from you to be able to tell the story that you need to tell to the audience?
Right. So I definitely, again, like you said, characters, but I have some dancers who understand like what's going on in my head and what we're trying to do a lot better than others. One of my dancers can like read my mind instantly. I'll say, this is the kind of thing we're looking for, and she'll be like, I know exactly what you're talking about. I have other dancers where it takes a little bit more time, a little bit more attention, a little bit more explanation to just kind of say, this is what we're doing. Okay, not quite like this, but more like this, and a little bit of, I use examples, and I tell them to draw on their own experiences to try. But, when you're asking dancers to dance on, physical abuse and they've never experienced anything like that, how can they, draw from anything? So it gets tricky, definitely, trickier, but I am very, very particular with who I place in, we don't like to say in main parts, but individual parts, and where, kind of who I collaborate with, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you do very, I guess heavy topics is a good way to put it, and I think that they're important, especially for, a group of teens or young adults to see, hence why it was called 20, kind of going through things in your 20s.
Yeah.
But if you hadn't experienced, let's say, like either some sort of verbal abuse or abusive relationship, what's your advice to writers maybe trying to write about things that they haven't quite experienced or things that they want to include with their characters in their novels that, I don't want to say they have a disconnect, but they haven't actually experienced in life?
Right. So a lot of my work, obviously because I'm a philosopher, is incredibly inspired by my philosophy. My kind of philosophy, I specialize in, these are going to sound like a bunch of big words, but feminist epistemology, prison abolition, phenomenology, critical race theory, queer theory. Basically, I guess to summarize, feminists' perspectives. So because of that, I read a lot of different perspectives of different situations. So I did a piece called Captive, and it was about the prison industrial complex. And I've never been to prison. Mm-hmm. I have, family members who have been to prison, but I have not been to prison. Nobody in my immediate family has been to prison. I've never, experienced that. But because of my research in philosophy, I have read narratives on people who have been to prison. And what I'm trying to do is articulate their narratives through dance. Mm-hmm. So it's a storytelling that is, personal to me, and that I feel passionate about this topic. So I guess if a writer is trying to, write about verbal abuse, like I also wrote about verbal abuse, and I didn't write about it, I'm sorry. I choreographed a piece on verbal abuse. Mm-hmm. And they have never experienced that. I would say that, I don't want to say do research because that sounds weird, but just make sure that you are checking in with yourself and your privileged position, as the person who's writing, as the person who's creating. You don't want to misinterpret anything. Mm-hmm. For example, if I was doing a piece on verbal abuse and for some reason, or if I was writing something on verbal abuse and I ended up unintentionally blaming the victim, right? Because I've never experienced that. I would just check in with yourself once in a while. Ask yourself, what is the point you're trying to make? Is this authentic to real life, lived experiences? You know, and really just, you know, because that's the best that we can do, especially as artists. People say that you can't create things that you haven't firsthand experienced. Well, well, then nobody would write anything, ever. So, anyway, I think that just, you know, even if you talk to somebody who experienced that, or if you know somebody, or if it's inspired by somebody, you know, just keep yourself checked, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's well said. So your next showcase is called Ungeographic.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that, the story, the process?
Yeah, it's, I would say, complicated. It's complicated for both philosophers to understand and dancers to understand. Because, like you said, it's a kind of the mesh of the two. So, Ungeographic, my upcoming showcase, is inspired by the book Demonic Grounds by Catherine McKendrick. If anybody listening or watching is interested in philosophy, it is a phenomenal read. It's contextually heavy, I would definitely say, so be prepared. But basically, McKendrick works on reconceptualizing Black female geographies, both historically and currently. And she comes up with this idea called the ungeographic. Basically, what it means is there are things in the world that dominant groups, right, white men, etc., say can't be geography. They say that geography is just maps. Geography is just colonization. Geography is, But McKendrick is saying, no, geography is people. Geography is lived experiences. Geography is more than that. Geography is who I am and where I've been and where I'm going. And so I take this notion and I apply it to multiple lived experiences. So each piece in the showcase is called the geography of blank, So one of them is the geography of a mental illness. This is kind of mapping the way in which mental illnesses can kind of confine people in a way, but also how from the outside makes individuals look quote unquote crazy. I have a piece called The Geography of Home. This is kind of a retelling of where home is and how home isn't necessarily places, but it's people. So again, this is it's a little hard, it's a little difficult for my dancers to understand this concept, and it's a little difficult for my philosophy friends to understand this concept and how they both relate to each other. But I think that once it hits the stage and once we kind of start doing that actual nitty-gritty work, it'll actually really, really make sense. And I think it'll kind of bring a lot of people together. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And I feel like I'm the most excited to see Ungeographic. So I'm definitely ready for that to hit the stage. Anna, thank you for letting me interview you. And taking time out of your busy schedule. If you guys want to see more interviews or hear more interviews, you can find them at youngeagerwriters.org. Thank you.